Carry on Constitution. Chapter 4.
Stella smiled at her husband.
Ultralight 14, steady on course, aye sir.
The mighty cruiser began to accelerate, shuddered slightly, and sped into the darkness of deep space. David tapped his comm badge. O'Reilly, what was that shudder?
Just a slight misalignment of the subspace regulators, Captain. I've realigned them already. We shouldn't have any more of that.
Thanks, O'Reilly. Then to the air, David remarked, Man, I sure am glad we've got O'Reilly on this old ship. Larry replied,
So am I, Captain. We'd be in deep doo-doo without him.
The rest of the bridge crew whispered a quiet amen. For the 1000th time, David sat in wonder. This bunch of people has gelled into the finest crew in the Navy. They genuinely like and trust each other and have a great deal of respect for one another. I've got to be the most fortunate captain in the fleet. Well, maybe George has as good a crew or had as good a crew. The mighty ship cruised through space at a steady ultralight 14. David was slipping into a quiet reverie when Lieutenant Tall Jensen, communications officer, interrupted his thoughts. Captain, Admiral Halloran on the comm. Startled, David replied, Oh. On screen. Yes, Admiral? The Admiral asked.
David, I'm a little concerned. What's your position right now?
David directed, Navigation, send the Admiral our location. Admiral, it's coming your way over the navigation channel. After a moment, Tim ordered.
Dave, you've fallen behind the fleet. You need to increase your speed to ultralight 15 for the next 16 hours. That will put you back where you should be.
David replied, Yes, sir. Sorry. To which Tim replied,
I understand, you had to go sublight to get together with the Western Systems Enterprise. But we do need to make up the lost time. David answered, Aye, sir. Helm, ultralight 15. Tapping his comm badge, David called, O'Reilly, we've got to make up some lost time. We'll be at ultralight 15 for the next 16 hours. Keep a close eye on your children. Then David heard,
Aye, sir.
Stella looked back.
Captain O'Reilly doesn't sound very happy. Sir.
David smiled. No, he sure doesn't. But he will baby those engines the whole way. Then David said almost to the air, I still thank my lucky stars we have a man like O'Reilly. His love for this old ship is what keeps her going. Larry turned.
You got that right, sir.
And with that, the entire bridge crew echoed those sentiments. Day after day, the mighty heavy cruiser sped through deep space, coming closer and closer to her goal. Then about 1,000 kilometers from P387, there appeared to the port side of the ship a bright spot in space that grew and then disgorged a ship. Helm, all stop.
Aye, sir. All stop.
Immediately the comm sounded.
Captain, it's the USDS Enterprise, Captain Zenner on the comm.
David answered, on screen. Captain Zenner. It is so good to see you. What news have you for us? Jana responded.
Captain Stevens, I'm glad to see you too. You're a little ahead of the coordinates we had calculated.
David shrugged. After you left us, Admiral Halloran ordered us to make up the time we had lost. I'm glad you found us, anyway. Captain Zenner answered.
I do have some good news. May we hook up again? I don't want to talk over the comm.
To which David replied, I understand. Number 1, hook 'em up. Larry responded and began to arrange the two ships to travel together. Securing the smaller Enterprise to the belly of the Constitution by their combined tractor beams and surrounding the smaller ship with their shields. Captain Zenner beamed aboard the Constitution and began to brief David on the progress of her mission. In David's ready room, the two captains sat and talked. Jana said,
Dave, I took your problem to the System Council, and they agreed that we should assist you in this mission. They have commissioned Fleet Admiral Kellore to lead a fleet of 12 of our most powerful ships to assist. And they are about 2 days behind us. They will be arriving at the point where we thought you would be.
David smiled. Let me get hold of the Admiral. David tapped his comm badge. Tall, please get Admiral Halloran on the comm. Secure. David heard.
Aye, sir. Captain, Admiral Halloran.
Jana greeted the Admiral and explained the success of her mission. She transmitted a set of coordinates and said,
My admiral will be joining us in about 2 days. But we will need to go to these coordinates and wait. You're a little ahead of what we had calculated before I left.
Tim answered.
I understand. Dave, you go and wait. I'll join you. I'll order the remainder of the fleet to wait until we make contact with Admiral. What's his name?
Jana replied.
Admiral Kellore.
David called to his first officer, Larry, we are going to these coordinates. David handed Larry a palm pad. When we get there, we will be joined by the Admiral, and we will wait for the Western Systems fleet. Ship's time approached 16:30, and David invited Jana to dine with him and his family. Jana accepted. Then she asked if some members of her crew could teleport aboard to sample the cuisine on the Constitution. He agreed that there should be full guest privileges accorded to the crew of the Enterprise. At the change of watch, David asked Stella to guide Jana to their cabin, explaining his invitation. Stella asked,
Then why don't you guide her?
David answered, because I have to go get little Davy unless you've forgotten our arrangement. She sighed.
Oh well, okay.
With that, the three left the bridge. The turbo lift dropped to the level that housed the nursery, and David got off. The two women went on to the captain's cabin. David found his son playing with several of the other children. He saw his dad and came running over, telling David all about his day. Little Davy jumped into his dad's arms, ready to go home. The other crew members picking up or dropping off their children smiled. The crew loved their children and were never afraid to show their affection. David lifted his son to his shoulders, and father and son went home. David and Davy entered their cabin, seeing the two ladies setting the table and chatting. Stella and Jana smiled as the two guys came in. Stella said,
Get ready for dinner, boys.
They both replied, Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
And they went into the bathroom to wash up. The dinner was pleasant, and then the little family began their routine, father and son exercising together as the two women watched and chatted. Then, as usual, little Davy crawled up onto his mother's lap, and David sat close by as they read another of their favorite books, Dr. Seuss's Cat in the Hat. Jana listened and watched.
I wish I had a family like yours.
She said wistfully. Stella asked,
Is there a Mr. Zenner?
No.
Jana took the book in her hand.
This is rather antiquated, isn't it?
Stella answered,
David and I were born over 500 years ago. I grew up as a military brat in many different schools, but I learned to love books. David grew up in the California school system, and he too learned to love books. We have a small collection of books, many of which are books for little Davy.
David interjected, Admiral Halloran is also one who loves antiques. The ladies talked on while David took little Davy in and put him to bed. After helping Davy say his prayers, David closed the door, wishing his son good night. As he entered the living area, Jana got up.
Thank you for a lovely evening. I'm a little tired, so I'll say good night. I'll find my way to the teleporter room.
And with that, she departed. Stella regarded her nails a moment and then spoke.
Jana spent her very first assignment on the same ship she is commanding today. Did you know that?
David replied, No. Stella went on.
Her first captain is now her admiral.
He asked, Fleet Admiral Kellore? Stella answered.
Yes. She's in love with him.
David commented, That's nice, she said.
David, we have to get them together.
David replied, Lieutenant Stevens. Mind your own business. Stay out of it. If you go sticking your nose into other people's business, it will get chopped off. She stated in a stilted voice.
Captain Stevens, if you don't, at least, find out how he feels about her, you are going to have a lot of time to get to know your son. You may have to move into his room.
He quietly answered, That's blackmail. And she replied,
Yes, it is.
In a sergeant major's voice, David replied, Well, Lieutenant, I am still captain of this ship, and I can assign you to any duty and any watch, in the interest of your career. She replied loudly.
That's blackmail.
And he replied, It sure is, Stella whispered.
Are we fighting?
I hope not. David went on, I love you too much to fight. But, my darling, we need to mind our own business. She screwed up her face.
But it's so sad. Admiral Kellore has never married, and neither has Jana.
David said, "It is sad. But is none of our business."
Everything grew quiet. Then Stella got up and began to prepare for bed. David knew she was angry, so he sat for a while. Then after she was in bed, he got ready and retired. Her kiss was quick and cold. David knew the symptoms but didn't know what to say or do. He knew he was right, and so did she. Time would heal this too. Later that night, Stella woke David.
I'm sorry, dear. Will you forgive me?
David replied, "Of course." And he reached over and gave her a kiss. "Now go to sleep." With a mock leer, Stella answered,
Later.